Let's do this. It is time for the Resilience Reset, and it's Thursday, and you know what that means. It means I have read another book this week, and we're going to chat about it. Now, as a reminder, because you may be thinking, Allison, some of these books that you're reading are really old. It's like I'm not going to the brand new section in, chapters. But here's the thing, most of these books are still on the bestseller list or definitely still really well read, even though they were printed, oh gosh, I think, when was this one done? 2009. Ooh. But that's all right. The reason I'm reading these books is because it's Tom Bilyeu's top 25 list. So at the beginning of the summer, I decided to commit to reading all 25 of his books, and then I had a bunch of other ones I'd already started reading, and make it a summer of learning. So I've slowed down the learning a little. I'm just doing one book a week, and this is the one I'm on, and we're going to today. I did finally finish it last night, and I got as far as the afterword, which, do I have to read the afterword? I don't know. Anyway, if you have read this, if you want to chime in, please do hop in the chat box. I would love to hear from you and your opinion on Start With Why. Now, first of all, I want to say I loved reading the book because Simon Sinek writes the way he speaks. So either he has an exceptionally gifted ghostwriter or he actually writes his own books. And I'm not convinced that most of the books I've read this year are written by the actual authors. They are ghostwritten, which, you know what? If that's what you got to do to be an author, go for it. I mean, I write all my own stuff, but that's me. And that's I got to grab my water. Sorry. Hold on one sec. Obviously still at the hotel, heading home tonight in time for karate. By the way, I got 2 stripes, if you haven't been following along. I got 2 stripes on my white belt. Really exciting. Anyhow. So I think he writes it himself, or as I said, he has an excellent writer, because it's awesome to hear him, because I love listening to him speak. If you've ever heard Simon Sinek speak, he's got a really cool cadence about it and a very unique style and you can really hear his voice in the writing. Now, once again, we've got a book that uses all the big companies as examples, and he does that purposefully because I guess we all know them, but there are no real life stories. Like, we're not all Steve Jobs. We're not all trying to create the next Microsoft. We're not all trying to become Walt Disney. And he continually is using these companies as an example. And because it was written in 2009, it's kind of fun to think back to the technology around, the iPod being transformative. And like, imagine if he were to continue to write this today, that would be really kind of fun and cool. So there's a lot of stories that, and it's kind of one of those books, I forget which one it was, the early days when I read it, that I was like, oh, you could just say this in like a quarter of the time, but then you get into a story and you're like, oh, are we talking about this again? And then there'd like be a really good point. So you have to read like 25 paragraphs to get to the really good point. And it's because the stories build and whatnot. But, I was kind of getting like, yeah, I'm like, okay, I get it. But then there'd be something new. So I guess that's not right. So let's talk about his perspective, and it's the golden circle. And so the golden circle concept is, and by the way, no expert here. All I've done is I'm aware of the golden circle. It's in all things and I don't know. It's important to the way Mother Nature works. But essentially what he's doing is comparing our brain and our decision-making to the why and the what. So he says, start with why, because it will dictate the how, and the how will dictate the what. And now, to me, that absolutely makes sense. But here's where I have a problem with the start with why. Because most of the time when I talk with business owners, what's your why? Their why is focused on their family. It's providing to be a better father. It's, trying to be a contributing member of society. It's something that is internally driven from their perspective, that's their why. That working hard is to achieve something for their family, or, you know, because they have a desire to be someone or something big. And the problem with that is I don't think anybody else is going to buy from you if that's like, it's going to be really good for your own motivation. It's going to help you tap into your discipline. It's going to push you when you are not feeling like doing the thing that's important to do. And that's awesome. But the concept of start with why, I think, has gotten messed up, because there's start with why on how we show up, which I think the marketplace cares very little about. But what he's saying in this book, Start With Why, is that the marketplace cares significantly about your why. And so, for example, like Steve Jobs his why was to push the status quo. I'm paraphrasing. And so the people then could identify with those who want to also push the status quo. And then they would be more aligned with the brand. So whatever product comes out, that's great. And I guess knowing your why is the only way to be successful. I totally agree with that. I think there are a lot of companies who don't have a clue as to why they do what they do, or their marketplace certainly doesn't have a why to do what they want to do. You know what I mean there? And he says, but it is the only way to maintain a lasting success and have a greater blend and flexibility. So part of this I agree with, and part of it I don't. So I do think that there are a lot of companies, again, that don't lead with their why, that don't have it embedded, that seem to be doing okay or successful. But I think where knowing your why allows for more innovation and flexibility is really quite profound. And one of the things he talks about on page 167 is the celery test. And I think this is important to understand. So let's say you go to a party and you're like, okay, I've got to figure out how to fix this part of my business. And somebody says, and I'm paraphrasing 4 pages of the story here to bring it into 20 seconds. You know, oh, what you need is you need Oreos. Oh, you need M&Ms. Oh, you need rice milk. And oh, you need celery. And so then you get up to the cash. So you go, okay, that's what I need to fix this. So you go to the grocery store, you grab Oreos, M&Ms, celery, and rice milk. You get up to the cashier and somebody looks at you and they have no idea what you stand for, because you have Oreos, rice milk, celery, and M&Ms. So now if you start with your why being, I want to be really, or, you know, our company is about bringing healthy alternatives to the marketplace. And then somebody says, I have, okay, so if you start with that, then you can get rid of the Oreos and the M&Ms because they don't match the healthy. And then all of a sudden the stand and it's like, okay, well, I have celery and rice milk. So somehow or other, then you can see that my what is aligned with my why. That's one of the analogies he has in here, the celery test. And so I think one of the helpful things is that if you know your why, then it can be a great decision-making tool. So that celery test is very good, right? So if your why is to, like for me, one of my whys is I really sincerely believe that people are stressed and suffering in their own little personal hells in their head, and they desperately don't need to be. And it's just our patterns that are making it happen. And I just want to get it out there so that people know, like, there is a better, less stressful way. And so that drives me, but it's not what drives me. Like, I guess it does drive me every day, but it's just so embedded. I don't think about it. I don't say that really in front of people. Like, it's just kind of something I do. But knowing that that's something that motivates me, and how different and how much more joyful our lives can be when we're not living in this frenzy of stress, it would be really weird if I started like to this every day, really stressed. I think like that's how you can, like, when you know your why, you've got to get things aligned, right? And part of what he's talking about in the book about authenticity is that we are authentic when our why is aligned with our what and our how. Okay. So here's another thing though. By the way, feel free to chime in on the chat box here, folks. Like, I'd love to hear from you. Whatever you think. I mean, I don't have the right answer for this, right? Like, I never really sat well with the start with why, because it's really hard to articulate. And I almost wonder if one of the reasons I don't love the whole start with why concept is because it is hard to articulate. And then I found this part. And I think this says, well, F word, no wonder. That was my note right there. You see that? I put it with an A though, and not a U. Let me read this little bit out to you. The part of the brain that controls feelings and the part that controls language are not the same. Skipping ahead. Which is firmly grounded in the biology. Okay, so I'll just read it all. Given that the cone is simply a three-dimensional rendering of the golden circle, which is firmly grounded in the biology of human decision-making, the logic follows that organizations of any size will struggle to clearly communicate their why. Translated into business terms, this means that trying to communicate your differentiating value proposition is really hard. No shit, Sherlock. Totally is. But at least that tells us why it's hard, because our feeling side of the brain and our language side of the brain are not the same part. And so getting the two to actually intersect and connect and share in a way that makes sense is really hard. All right, Michelle is saying that authenticity comes through with the why. Yeah, like if you know your why, and then the question becomes, can someone be authentic without being able to articulate their why, or without knowing it? Like, I think of the why as something that is so ingrained in you that is just how you show up. Let's see what Greg's saying today. I would agree that a company's why should resonate with their customers. However, I believe few are willing to pay more for it. Ooh, right. So the customer, see, and he's saying in here that the customer will align with your why, and therefore their loyalty will be significantly increased, and therefore they will stand in line at all hours in the middle of the night for the new gadget, at this point in the book, the new iPod. And the thing, I feel like when we pick on the stories of the big companies, so the Apple, I mean, Apple is an anomaly, PC is an anomaly. Like, what about us on the ground, right? What about the real estate company? Do people, like, if you say, I believe everybody deserves to live in their absolute perfect home, as part of your marketing and your strategy, how does that help? Like, maybe it does. I don't know. Dan's got something here. Let's see what he's saying. In 19th century philosophy department, final exam had one word question. Why? Interesting. Almost all the students failed trying to answer with explorations, arguments, and conclusions. One student wrote down 2 words, why not, and got 100% true story. Oh my God. I would love to know who that student was and where they are today, because they're probably very, very successful. Why not? That's a really cool story. Thank you. Fun. Okay, I had some other notes here. Like, it's almost like in the book, and by the way, there are lots of people who think that this isn't the right way to go, but he has a lot of proof in here. But I feel like the proof, I wish he would have shared some small business story options, because I don't know about you, but like, I don't have a multi-million-dollar personal branding campaign, or, you know, to try to figure out how do I get my message out to millions of people. Like, it just doesn't work. Although I will tell you this, there is on page early adopters 116. he said, in order for you to meet the masses. So, then of course I'm thinking about my own company, right? Like, how can I reach more people? And so he shares this concept, which most of us have seen before. So there are the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and the laggards. Now, I don't know where you guys would put yourself, but I'm going to put myself not as an early adopter. I am an early majority, and I'm okay with that. I am an early majority. I'm very rarely, I would think, a late majority. I don't think I take that long to get onto things, but I'm not the person who's like out there trying to figure out what's the new thing that's kind of cool and going on. I'll let somebody else figure out what's cool and going on, and then I'll go, yeah, I'll get on that bandwagon. I don't know. Where do you think you fall in that? I'd be really curious. So, but he's saying the only way to reach the masses is you've got to connect with the early adopters. And the early adopters have an identity about them, and therefore they want to connect with the why. And then what happens is they get so excited about it and they're connected with the why, and then they end up pushing it out to the early adopters, people like me, or the early majority, people like me. And then eventually when all the people like me, who are the early majority, get on board, then the late majority go, oh yeah, I guess I got to get on that board, right? So that is, so as you think about like someone like me who ultimately wants to impact the lives of millions of people, and I'm quite happy impacting the people I'm impacting now, by the way, just for the record. But what he's saying is I've got to find the early adopters who are then going to align with the why and go out. But I don't know how to do that. I don't know. Feels like it's a lot of work. Okay, so here's something else. So he did say this that I thought was a very interesting thing to consider. So he used a lot of the I have a dream speech, right? That makes sense. Hold on. Let me find what I'm looking for. 167. No, that's not what I'm looking for. It was about clarity. Part of it is like there's this struggle with our brains creating our why and clearly articulating it. But you can't actually reach anybody unless you're exceptionally clear about your why. And then once you have clarity, it's really easy to use a megaphone. But then if you have a megaphone, meaning you have a platform where you can spread it out, the why in that case then has to be the same why as the people who are listening, in the early adopters, in order for them to latch on and then spread it. So you need a clear why, then you need a megaphone to get it out, and then you need to have it align with the why of other people. And so the whole I have a dream speech was not just that, he had the dream. It was that he spoke for every person in the audience because they had the same dream. And that's how it got amplified. But I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do we articulate this for the real estate agent, for the financial advisor? Maybe advertising is a great example, because sure, your why is perhaps you sell insurance because your grandfather didn't have life insurance and, everything went, wrong when he died and the government took a whole bunch of stuff or whatever, right? There's some deep-rooted why that introduced you to the financial sector. So it's a great story. It humanizes you. It gives you the thing, but does it really align with what your client wants? Is it going to make somebody want to buy from you? And that's what I'm not totally sure it does. And so Mel White, who's a buddy of mine from LinkedIn, and he's down in the States, and he and I've talked. He sent me an article by a fellow named Mark Schaefer called Rise Above the Noise. And he talked about, please, let's not start with your why. And he has a similar viewpoint to me, is that it's not about your why, it's about your audience's why, your potential prospects. What are their why? But then if it's about their why, is that really authentic? Because that's not necessarily your why. So then you're creating a why for somebody else's why. And to me, that doesn't make sense. So maybe I'm just not seeing it. I know I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth here. Like on one hand, I see where there's a lot of value in starting with the why. And on the other hand, I'm just not seeing how to really integrate that into your marketing or into your day-to-day or into your client life cycle or your sales process for the individual. He talks about this guy who, Bruder, I think his name is, Rod Bruder, who is like notorious for seeing things in different ways. So he tells a story about how he was walking with his daughters and he said to them, "What does that crosswalk sign say? Like, what does it mean?" And it means don't walk. And he asked the question back to his daughters, "Well, how do we know it doesn't mean run?" Like, so we assume don't walk. Okay, so you don't walk. But what if it's saying don't walk, run? And so his philosophy, which I absolutely agree with, is that we only see things the way we see things because we don't have an alternative way to see them. And so it feeds into the whole idea around our perception is our reality. And that's great. But then he is saying that the reason this guy could go into all the different companies, like I think it was like, there was a business, like a financial company and maybe like Boeing or something big like that, doesn't matter. Anyway, whoever this guy is. But my little note in the margin is it less about his why and more that he just has a strength to see alternatives? Like, I feel like we're kind of calling it all why when maybe it doesn't all need to be why. I don't know. The other point I want to make about this book is Simon Sinek doesn't let us into his story until like the last chapter. The only like relatable thing for the plebes of us plebes of the world who are not Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, where he talks about it on a personal level, why he's so obsessed with, inspiring people to do work that inspires them, is great. And he put it at the very, very end. And the truth is, as an author, I know most people don't read to the end of the book. So it's kind of worth going and looking. Anyway, so it's a good book. It's outdated because of some of the examples. I know there have been more books that he's written, including Find Your Why, which was probably brought forward. I could see how he did that as a second step because people would have felt like, okay, yeah, I get it, but now what do I do with that? So I haven't read it, but I love his interviews around Leaders Eat Last and The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. He's just a brilliant mind, right? Like, I'm a huge fan. And I love hearing him speak whenever I'm at conferences that he is there speaking at. And there we go. So next week, speaking of next week, you know what? I'm speaking at a conference. And so on Wednesday, I won't be able to have the live. Anyway, just plan ahead for that. Sorry about that. Maybe I'll upload something special. Never know. We'll see. Anyway, I'm going to go. I hope you have the absolute best day. I'd love to hear you in the comments. Let me know your opinion. Do we need to start with why? And if so, how does that apply to us on the ground so that we can connect it with other people's whys as opposed to our why, that we want to serve our purpose, we want to, reach our full potential, we want to make a greater impact in the world. Like, all of those things are true about me and my why, right? I want to end this internal battle that people are having in their souls and their heads, and they're needlessly stressing. I think it's about much more than stressing. I think it's, because I have trouble articulating. I really think that the work I'm doing is, it's like problem solving for the human experience, right? Like, how do we take our human experience and make it better? Anyway, well, we start with stressing less, doing more, and being happier. See how I got the tagline in there? All right, I'm going to call it. Have the best day. Thank you for being here. Thanks for all your input. And I hope you have a beautiful day. Bye for now.